And at the start this morning, a very sad start indeed, as all of the riders and the Tour de France organisation take a minute's silence here in respect of a 12-year-old boy who died on Sunday from his injuries received after he was hit by a publicity car travelling ahead of the Tour de France on Thursday. How very, very sad. So in the end, 137 riders now continuing on the road through the Alps, 196 kilometres. This is the sprinter Albertville. McEwen are getting the better of Eric Zabel, but this rider also deciding, I'm afraid, his tour is over. The abandon of David Plaza.
Well, you know, this is going to be a pretty hard stage with 4 big mountain passes finishing over the Col de Jouplan. But Marco Pantani, Phil, he's decided today he wants to blow this race to pieces as he goes over the first climb of the day, the Col de Cézy, in first place. He's joined on the second climb of the day by Escartine and Hervé, and they're putting a serious amount of pressure on the rest of the race.
Well, this is a long breakaway by Marco Pantani, and quite for what reason other than divilment, which is what Claudio Chiappucci used to do. There's no other reason to have attacked, and he's joined now by Pascal Hervé. It's going to force a reaction sooner or later from the yellow jersey, Lance Armstrong.
Well, there's the hi-hats of Texas there coming out to support Lance Armstrong. But you know, this attack of Marco Pantani today, Phil, has put an awful lot of pressure on the main field, and it has forced the likes of Lance Armstrong to chase for the whole of all of these mountain passes. We're now very close to the summit of the Col de la Colombière, 131 kilometres covered, and still 50 kilometres to go until the final climb of the day of the Jouplan.
Pantani, Escartine at last putting in a big appearance at the front on the mountains in this race for Kelme, who are leading the team race, and behind Pascal Hervé without his captain Richard Virenque yet again. And the crowd is enormous here. This race to the Alps has brought out the people in their tens of thousands, and the Col de la Colombière, you know, is not the hardest climb of the day. That's the last one, the Col de Jouplan.
That is a very difficult climb, but racing as hard as they have done over all of these 3 climbs has made it difficult for everyone in the bike race. The only thing I can think behind the attack of Marco Pantani today, Phil, is because of this little discussion going on between himself and Lance Armstrong. He's gone out there, he doesn't care about Lance Armstrong, he's going to try and blow this race to pieces, and if one of the victims is Lance Armstrong, so well be it.
Well, he's timed at 1 minute and 40 seconds behind these 3 right now. And continually looking around is Pascal Hervé. It's almost as if he expects Richard Virenque to come up and join him.
Well, he's a tough bike rider. He's proving to be almost as strong as Richard Virenque at the moment. He's always been on the attack, and in the mountains we've seen him so many times looking over his shoulder. But they're not really working too hard with Marco Pantani, who's never really managed to have an advantage of more than 1 minute and 40 seconds over the yellow jersey group of Lance Armstrong, which is now down to a very select group of men.
Heading up towards the top of the Col de la Colombière, and then they are facing 65 kilometres to the finish, an easy 65. They drop down to the bottom of the valley at Taninges, and then they climb out of it again to Morzine. And over the top, Marco Pantani, doing what he does best, goes over the mountain first. It's a third climb of the day rather, that he has topped in first place. We're going back here now to look at the Armstrong group, and they are a little way behind yet because they're not at the top of the climb by any means. Richard Virenque dicing with the new champion of the mountains in this tour, Santiago Botero.
Well, I think it's a little bit of a weak one because, you know, he's trying to get himself minor points here over these mountain passes, and the 2 Kelme riders who are first and second in the standings are riding all over him. First place over the front here for the man who was the king of the mountains on 5 separate occasions, but in fact that first place is from the group, and there are 3 riders already going over the summit of this mountain pass.
And the Armstrong group has closed in a little bit. They were 111 down, 114. They've come back to just over the minute, so they've had a good steady climb there now. Good fast descent too off the Col de la Colombière, heading down to Châtillon-sur-Cluse. This beautiful area here around Morzine.
Well, Phil, Richard Virenque is trying to get off the front on the descent here of the Col de la Colombière. He's a very good descender. He's left the group of Lance Armstrong behind, and he may well be the sort of rider who can make the junction here on the descent.
Well, he's looking to bridge a 59-second gap here to the men who are setting up the pace at the moment. Pantani's had a great day out, attacked on the Col de Cézy. Over the top of the Col des Adavis, he was winning there too. And the peloton with Lance Armstrong at that point was 115 down. But look at this now, attack and counter-attack, and it looks like Pantani's teammates are trying to hit him.
Well, this is the Telecom riders on the front. That's Guarini there, and Udo Bolt's trying to pull it all back. And I can't really figure out just now, Phil, why they are chasing so hard. They're not too worried about Richard Virenque, who at the moment has been joined by Santiago Botero.
Getting my pinks mixed up there, Paul. But yes, the Telecom boys are outnumbering Lance Armstrong and his team right now, as this group is still concentrating on holding itself together, at least until it gets across the valleys through Taninge and then onto the Col de Jouplan.
Well, this is why they were chasing. Look at this. Christophe Moreau, in fact, has come across the gap on the descent. 4 leaders now at the front of the bike race: Escartine, Pantani, Moreau and Hervé.
Well, we're heading down towards the start of the day's big climb here now as we cross the town of Les Clous. And I must say now, it's the coming together of all of them here.
Well, the whole of this main group is coming back together, and it was really because Christophe Moreau got across the gap there. We had this huge reaction coming from Team Telecom. They're all back together. Lance Armstrong is also comfortably in that group at the moment. And you know, Phil, it's all going to go down to one big showdown on the slopes of the Col de la Jouplan.
Well, there's Pantani swinging off. He's been out front for so long today, and now all of a sudden he sees this rather large group come around him. There's a tap on his butt there by the guy who's alongside him, one of his teammates, just to say keep in, Marco. But now we're going to race out of this town, and this is the Châtillon, and then it's on then to the climb of the Jouplan. Udo Bolt's licking his lips, but I wouldn't think in trepidation more than expectation.
Well, they're trying to set it up. These 3 riders have slipped clear on the slopes before we get to the final climb of the day. Kivilev is in there, so is Didier Roos. And on the slopes of the climb, Phil, as soon as we've hit this climb, it is absolutely exploded. There are bike riders all over the place.
Well, they're getting it together, but this, you know, Paul, you've ridden the Jouplan. This is the most deceptive mountain. You don't feel a height like you do in the Grand Alps, but it is such a hard climb.
It is horrendous. It's made more difficult, really, because of the fact that at the bottom there's an incredible gradient. On the front, this is Roberto Heras putting down the hammer. He's alongside Lance Armstrong at the moment. Richard Virenque is there as well. Armstrong looks very concentrated right now. On the back of the group there in the pink is Jan Ullrich. These, Phil, are the heads of state of the world of international cycling, and they're going to fight it out on this very difficult ascent.
And the man no longer here is the man who caused all the problems today since the Col de Cézille, and that is Marco Pantani. He is in a little bit of trouble, and so too is Jan Ullrich.
Well, Ullrich has cracked again. This climb a little bit too steep for him. He's going to have to try and ride at his own tempo. He started the day a long way behind Lance Armstrong. In fact, he was almost 7 minutes and 26 seconds behind. The Tour de France almost over for the big German who's won this race before, but he must still try and stay in contact, Phil, if he wants to take second place up to Paris. Armstrong looking very good right now. Heras is the man setting the pace, and Richard Virenque just sitting back, waiting for an opportunity to attack. But it's on the early slopes of this climb, Phil, that you can see how narrow the road is, but it is very steep in these corners.
Well, this is really something we never expected to see, but Jan Ullrich, who hasn't prepared for this tour, perhaps as he might have done, is now finding that his body is not lasting the full 3 weeks, and this second leg in the mountains is proving that little bit too hard. Look at the gap now to the yellow jersey.
It is so difficult for Jan Ullrich. He really needs to look at his preparation, Phil, because, you know, you cannot keep consistent form when you come in and out of form the way Jan Ullrich is doing, and you cannot keep consistent form when you put on weight and lose it as rapidly he is doing as well.
Further up the climb now, Roberto Conti, I think it is here. He's still on the attack as he continues. No, it's Guido Trentin just here now.
Well, this looks like one of the riders with him as well as one of the riders from AG2R, and that may well be Kivilev. A great ride by him to get up here at the moment. These 2 riders had a slight advantage at the bottom of the climb, but that's about to get reeled in at the moment. You know, Heras has gone, Phil, and Armstrong has not responded just yet.
He's just sitting there, keeping a tempo going, riding shoulder to shoulder with a man who has 5 times won the King of the Mountains this year. He thought it would have been a little bit of a preliminary to have got 6 and equal Lucien Van Impe of Belgium and Federico Bahamontes of Spain. Not been the case, because the Kelme team have had a wonderful tour, and now they're using Roberto Heras. This, surprisingly, is Heras's first Tour de France, but he's had superb results in Spain and in Italy.
Well, 3 times he's finished inside the top 5 at the Tour of Spain. He's a great bike rider. He doesn't look under pressure at all at the moment now as he rides away from Armstrong and Virenque. He started the day, Phil, in 5th place in the overall standings, and a good ride today may well put him very close to a podium position in Paris. Armstrong now content to let Richard Virenque do all of the pacemaking, and the man who he's doing serious damage to, in fact he was doing serious damage to, because look at this, Jan Ullrich has recovered. He is coming back to the tail of the yellow jersey of Lance Armstrong. This man today from Germany, Phil, is riding on courage.
What we have seen in this year's Tour de France is all of the big names who normally appear to float around the Tour de France, they have all been put under pressure at some time or other. Ullrich suffered on the road to Hautacam. He's clearly suffering on the Jouplan today, but he has pedalled right back to the side of Armstrong, and it shows you no matter how great a champion you are, it hurts just as much as if you're not.
Well, that's what it's all about. Bike riding is you have to suffer, you have to learn to suffer, and I have to say, I think today Jan Ullrich has dug very deep into his reserves. Looking now at Trentin, he's gone off the front here, the Italian rider on the Vinny Calderillo team. He wears 189. He is now currently the leader on the road. He's left that man from Kazakhstan behind, Kivilev, and he now looks very comfortable, Phil, but there's a huge battle on the road behind.
And there's a huge crowd on the Jouplan. I don't know if they've all run across from the top of the Col de la Colombière, but that's hardly possible. But the Guido Trentin is trying to do something here, but Roberto Heras is trying to do something even better. Heras is riding superbly now.
He's catching here Didier Roos. Roos took an advantage on the bottom road there to come onto the Col de Jouplan with an advantage of around about 1 minute. He's being left behind now. There are just 2 riders on the road in front of this man, Roberto Heras. One is Andrei Kivilev, and he'll pretty soon be on his tail, and then that will leave just 1 rider in front of him, and that will be Guido Trentin.
So we're seeing here Roberto Heras. He probably sees this as his last chance in his first Tour de France to leave a lasting impression on the race, and he's trying to win this, and he's got to get time on the climb of the Jouplan. This is Kivilev he's bringing back now. He's just picking them off one by one. There were 3 riders clear at the start of the climb. There's only 1 of them left, and he's right in the far side of our camera lens there, and that is Guido Trentin. He's just around the corner, and once Heras gets up to him, he'll be the first rider on the road.
Well, what a great tour this has been for the Kelme team. They've already got 2 stage victories under their belt. Armstrong now is maybe going to try and put an end to that. Ullrich has come forward, and he is accelerating, but the man who blew up the race today, Marco Pantani, is slipping away from the front.
And look at this, it looks as though Lance Armstrong is now in a little bit of trouble here. Look at that face. This is not the face of the man who has ridden the Tour de France so far. At the bottom of the climb, Armstrong, to me, looked as though he was going to eat the field alive. He doesn't look that way anymore.
Well, that was a double take there. You could just see Jan Ullrich looking over. He is probably somewhat surprised at this performance by Lance Armstrong, because earlier down the slopes he was left behind by the flying Texan, and now the tables have turned. Armstrong now is in difficulty, Phil. This is the first time we've seen any chink in his armour since the start of the Tour de France, and we're going to have to see whether or not Jan Ullrich has got any more power in his legs. I think, in fact, Armstrong has absolutely hit the wall.
Well, you know, every top cyclist has a bad day. It's up to the other riders to find out when and hit him when it hurts most. And it looks as though Ullrich is very surprised by the fact he has distanced Armstrong, because Ullrich himself was in trouble at the start of the climb. He appeared to be talking to Virenque, and he was certainly looking at him.
I don't think they can believe what is happening. Everybody thought this man was superhuman. Everybody thought that he was a man who was unbeatable. But right now, Phil, he is proving that he is immortal like any of us. You know, if you have a bad day in the mountains, you can lose many, many minutes. And Armstrong, for the moment, is going to have to relax, have to be calm, and have to try and make sure he doesn't lose too much time. Roberto Heras now has been joined by Richard Virenque, and in fact the man that they have both left behind is Jan Ullrich.
Well, we never saw the move by Virenque. He just kept the pace going. Ullrich, as far as we know, is still ahead of Lance Armstrong. But now these two are clear here, and they have seen each one of the riders alongside them systematically destroyed. So Virenque and Heras are really as free as birds now. Once over the top of the Jouplan, it's a full-on descent right down to the finishing line in Morzine.
Look at this, the time difference between Ullrich and Armstrong, Phil, is almost 1 minute at the moment. Ullrich himself is very close to the 2 leaders, Virenque and the man from Kelme, Heras. 28 seconds is the difference between them almost at the summit, but Armstrong is losing big time today. He must not panic. He has to remember at the start of the day he was 7.5 minutes clear.
Well, Virenque goes and takes out the points for the King of the Mountains, and then immediately asks Heras to come through and work. I don't think he's got much of a hope of that right now. Vironk himself is a very, very good descender. And now look at this, Paul. He's over in third place and he's taking a bike here. He is asking for a bike. Now, is he wanting a new bike? This, in fact, has his race number on, so he must have changed earlier.
Well, there must have been a special plan here for these guys to have a special light bike for a climb here up to the summit of Jouplan. There is Lance Armstrong with Conti, with Trentin, with Botero and Christophe Moreau. But this must be, Phil, one of the worst days he's had so far in the Tour de France. Just getting onto the back there as well, the Seiko rider Daniel Atienza.
Well, he's a fair way down, you know. Virenque, Heras, Ullrich went over 28 seconds behind the two leaders, but then stopped. Now look at the clock here, and Armstrong comes over around about 2:10. Yeah, so 2:10, 2:11 behind, 2:13 if they split time them over the top. That is an awful big gap to make up now. For the first time in this year's Tour, at least since Armstrong got the yellow jersey on, he is losing time to his main rival.
His main rival meaning Jan Ullrich. Ullrich now trying to pull himself back up to these two and the possibility of getting himself a stage victory. But you know, Richard Vironk has got the bit between the teeth right now. He's working well with Heras. They now are trying to get the stage victory. For Heras, he's trying to pull himself up high in the overall rankings. A good finish by him today, Phil, could pull him up into third place overall, and that is something that he would certainly be dreaming about after a 5th and 2/3 at the Tour of Spain.
Well, the early descent of the Jouplan is a very, very helter-skelter style, switchbacks all the way. After that, it becomes a very fast descent right down into Morzine. Really, you descend till the last 500 metres of the stage today, and then you race into the main street of this beautiful alpine town. I think it's lucky for the race today, Paul. They haven't added in the climb of Avoriaz just outside Morzine.
Well, it's very lucky for Lance Armstrong because this is a bad day for him. If they did climb up to Avoriaz, he would be losing even more time than he is just now. Currently, he's around about 1.5 minutes behind Jan Ullrich and 2.5 minutes behind these two leaders. The leaders are Roberto Heras, number 24 from Kelme, and Richard Vironk from France on the Polti squad. Vironk, though, Phil, you can see urgently coming to the front. He's a great descender, and this man, not one of the best descenders in the world. Even though he is a much heavier man, he doesn't really seem to negotiate the corners or the descents as well as he should.
You can gain or lose so much time going down a steep hill. It takes a very special type of man who has no nerves to go down these mountains. They're not worried about oncoming traffic, at least. The roads are totally closed. Although there was a nasty accident on this mountain a few years back now when a spectator on a bike was riding up and he was hit by a rider at the back coming down, and that rider is no longer with us.
No, in fact, that was a very sad affair. He was in a coma for many, many days, and when he came out of the coma, he ended up being almost a vegetable. And a few years ago, in fact, he committed suicide.
But happier days now in the Tour de France. Well, not for Robert Heras because we've missed it. Our camera was cutting away. We are just on the run into the finish here. That was Heras on the ground at around the 2 kilometre point. Now look at the delay here.
Well, I don't think anybody could have expected that. He came into the corner. That is an unbelievably bad line. Straight into the corner there, straight into the barriers. And he looks as if he's not hurt himself too much, Phil, but you can see the front wheel of that machine is absolutely useless. He has to get a new bike, but this is going to give the chance to Richard Vironk, who is well inside the last kilometre now, fighting up this last incline. He is looking to try and get himself a stage victory here at the Tour de France, and it will be a sweet one for the Frenchman.
Well, it certainly will be. He's been looking for this. He's a popular man amongst the public here in France. He won a Courchevel last time where Pantani won. Pantani won here last time, and now he's done it. And he gets the victory in 5.5 hours and salutes the crowd. So he's won Les Ardennes, Cotteret in the Pyrenees. He's now added Morzine to Courchevel in the Alps. And this man here gaining time today on Lance Armstrong. He too, sadly for Heras, has picked him up.
Well, he's picked up Heras, and this man is flying now. He's pulling himself closer and closer to Armstrong. He will have had good morale at seeing Armstrong suffer. He comes across the line 24 seconds behind Vironk. Right on his tail is Heras, but the important thing now, Phil, is the time to the Lance Armstrong group. Bellocchi, Hervé and Escartine have passed Armstrong as well.
So Lance has had one of those terrible days you hope never comes, but usually does sooner or later. This is Escartine. He's had a pretty good journey through the Alps, which will now be behind them tomorrow as he sprints away for 4th place. He had a stage win in the race last year. Nothing come his way yet this year. And the sensation from Spain, Bellocchi over the line in 5th place, along with Pascal Hervé, and the clock counts on.
Well, that's the important thing for Armstrong. He mustn't panic. He must try and make sure he limits his losses. He started the day, Phil, with a huge margin. He's here right now. There is Botero with him, Christophe Moreau as well. The man in front is Trentine, the Italian rider on Vinny Calderillo. It's already 1.5 minutes, and he hasn't got to the finishing line just yet.
Well, he's still looking at around about a half minute, I think, because it's a fair way into Courchevel here. Armstrong knows that he's going to reduce his overall lead tonight. We don't know yet by about how much, but Botero has hung on to the back of these, and he has had another terrific day of racing for Kelme. He'll keep his lead in that King of the Mountains as well. Trentin has also had an excellent day out. Look at the clock. It's going to hit 2 minutes, I think. As they cross the line, it does. Armstrong will be glad that day is over.
Well, he's going to have to go away from here and try and recuperate, but the day certainly belongs to Richard Virenque. This man has been chasing a stage victory in the Tour de France for an awful long time, and you can see the pleasure in his face as he comes across the line.
So there is the stage result. Virenque ahead of Ullrich, Heras, Escartine, Belocchi. Armstrong finishing 8th and 2:01 down. That's a big loss for Armstrong. It's about 1.5 minutes plus on Jan Ullrich today. Lance Armstrong really did have a tough time, didn't he? Looking further down here, Christophe Moreau finished 9th in that same group. Marco Pantani in the end losing 13 minutes and 44 seconds, and that was a lot of time for him to lose. He started the attacking too early, it seems. But the man who really had a bad ride today and struggled was Lance Armstrong.